In this series in general, and the few coming parts specifically, I'll be less on the defensive and I will instead examine your epistemology in more detail. In particular, whether it is really the case that your supposed divine certainty, based on an indescribable divine revelation, is really as foundational as you claim it to be. As I said before, I actually agree with you that everyone, including you and me, are standing on the same foundation. In fact, I see it as rather unhelpful to even include it in our worldview, and instead regard it as more meaningful to start differentiating between worldviews when we examine our beliefs and claims which rest on top of this shared foundation. Ironic as it may sound, you would actually have to agree with this. In fact, your whole apologetic pretty much rests upon this principle. I do, however, need to add that the way you express your apologetic is rather inconsistent with it, and even other Christians have criticized you for not even listening to your opponents and instead engulfing them with a mindless barrage of one-liners, which you wave around like little flags at a football game. So perhaps you need to be reminded of something that you in fact already know and, apart from the term, almost literally express, but which apparently escapes you completely once you are in full flow, unleashing your vile waves of how do you know that? Presuppositional apologetics is based on the transcendental method, which could be summarized as follows. What must be, in order for what is, to be what it is. This principle in general can be quite helpful and is certainly not the root problem of presuppositionalism. This form of apologetics relies on the notion that everyone shares the same ultimate foundation, and as I said before, I certainly agree with that. The root of the problem of presuppositionalism, however, is the identification of this foundation as God, the non sequitur of equating this God with the biblical character Yahweh, and the abhorrent and self-refuting claim that the non-Christian is simply unwilling to acknowledge that this particular God is this shared foundation. Sai and other presuppositionalists claim that everything they know is at least ultimately based on divine revelation. Without such revelation, they claim that they cannot even know that anything at all exists, that they have any experiences whatsoever, or that the laws of logic are true, invariant, and universal. Let's focus on the laws of logic. Although I already made clear in part 3 of my previous series that Sai fails to distinguish between the laws themselves and what those laws refer to. I need to come back to that later, but for now let's just use the phrase laws of logic. Let's try to picture this as easy as possible. Most foundational would be God's existence, on which rests divine revelation, on which rests our understanding of the laws of logic. Probably one of the most dishonest and worthless questions Sai throws out at his opponents is the following. How do you know logical contradictions can't happen in your worldview? Sometimes he even states it as, why are logical contradictions not allowed in your worldview? How does he answer this question himself? Of course, by appealing to divine revelation. He knows contradictions cannot happen because God reveals to him with certainty that they can't happen. But it is easy to see that this cannot be Sai's epistemology despite of what he claims. After all, if logical contradictions can happen, then God can reveal with absolute certainty that they can't, even though they can. And the same would apply to the concept of omnipotence, and the question, how do you know God cannot perform logical contradictory acts or go against his own nature? The necessary conclusion is that Sai cannot appeal to divine revelation for his knowledge of the laws of logic, since that knowledge is a prerequisite for divine revelation. In order to receive any revelation from God, Sai already needs to be standing on the foundation of the laws of logic. Sai's claim has the order reversed. If you are familiar with Sai's debates, then you already know what his response would be. In fact, it is precisely what I responded to in part 3 of my original series. He tries to sidetrack the issue with a matter of ontology. Sai tries to equate God with the laws of logic by claiming that the laws of logic are immaterial, universal, and invariant, and God is immaterial, universal, and invariant. Since I already refuted this in part 3 of my original series, I won't be dealing with that claim here. But what I do need to point out is that this entire appeal is a non sequitur. Psi is confusing ontology with epistemology. What are the laws of logic is a matter of ontology. How do we know the laws of logic is a matter of epistemology. Appealing to God as the ontological foundation of the laws of logic, even if that somehow made any conceivable sense, again see part 3 of my original series, is irrelevant when it comes to the epistemological basis. And we already established that you cannot appeal to divine revelation for the laws of logic. We both appeal to self-attestation. In fact, if you showed any signs of consistency in your apologetic, you would admit that. After all, you constantly try to show how people contradict themselves when they deny the laws of logic or the concept of truth. All of us stand on the absolute foundation of reality and necessary facts of existence, which are described by the laws of logic. And nobody is able to escape that foundation, because you need this very foundation to even argue against it. That's self-attestation, and Psi is a hypocrite if he objects to self-attestation, since his own apologetic relies on it. Sound familiar, Psi? You either start with logic and reality, or else your worldview is reduced to absurdity. In fact, if a God would happen to exist, he himself would need to rely on the very same foundation that we are all standing on. I'll probably have more to say about God's epistemology later on in the series. However, the next part will be of a more educational nature, in which I'll talk about why matters of logical contradictions even arise in the first place, if they neither have nor can have anything to do with reality itself. I'll also talk more about the nature of truth. But not to worry, in the part after that, I'll continue this examination of the notion that divine revelation is as foundational as Psi claims it is. I will be dealing more with the notion of the reliability of our senses as well. This will also include a quite hilarious self-refutation based on something Psi said in a debate with a quite well-known YouTube atheist.